Hi guys, so this week we are moving on from talking about Abraham and the covenant with God, and we are moving on to the next book of the Bible, which is Exodus. Now, this is one of the stories that I desperately need you to internalize, because without understanding this story, you will not understand why Jesus came as a new sacrifice, why he established the new covenant, or why the covenant was established in the way that it was. Bear with me. I'm going to try to go through this as concise as possible. Now, when we talk about Moses, we are getting a mixture here. We're getting a mixture of fact, a mixture of things we need to take literally and historically, a mixture of allegory, of things that didn't necessarily happen but have immense meaning. And again, I have told you all this in the past. A lot of these stories are still debated today. So as far as the plagues that I'm about to go through, the way that you can interpret this yourself or take it, you can take it that they actually happened. You can take it as a allegorical meaning pointing to something greater in this like I can never say this word, anyway, pointing you to the end, pointing you to Christ, okay? So this is something that is still under debate and we don't know for sure, but let's talk about Moses. Now, through the book of Genesis, I stopped with Abraham, but what happens after Abraham, we have this beautiful metaphor where we see Sarai, who doesn't believe that God can give her a baby, contrasting with Mary, Jesus's mother, who whenever the Holy Spirit says to her, "You're going to have a baby," or the angel Gabriel says to her, "You're going to have a baby," she's just like, "Let it be done to me." Meanwhile, Sarai, who was told that she would have a baby, she laughs and she's just like, "Yeah, right, take my slave girl, have a baby with her." We have these contrasts, and then we have this contrast of Isaac walking up the mountain carrying his wood on his back to be sacrificed. This was a 3-day journey. And then we have Jesus, who rose after 3 days, who also carried the wood on his back to be sacrificed. So important. From there, the tribes of Israel, they move into Egypt, and eventually they become enslaved. Now, we are picking up in the next book of the Bible, Exodus, and talking about Moses, which the next covenant is made with Moses. Now, what was happening at the time is the Israelites had become slaves in Egypt, and one of the big concerns was that they were producing so many children, and they were growing in numbers. And Egypt had the worry that they are going to be able to overthrow the people who had them captured because there's far too many of them. Now, what Pharaoh says is he calls in the midwives. Midwives were basically, they would help a woman have a baby when she was in labor. He calls in the Hebrew midwives and he says, "You are to kill the babies as they are born." The midwives don't do it because what the Bible tells us is they were more afraid of God than they were afraid of Pharaoh. So what they told Pharaoh is, "We apologize. We haven't been able to kill the babies because the mother, they're too strong and they just have the babies too quickly, and we haven't even been there when the babies were born." So they lie about it, which, I probably wouldn't want to kill a baby either. Now, we are given amazing metaphors and allegory for how the God of Israel is stronger than the Egyptian gods. For the Egyptians, everything's a god. Everything, the river is a god, the earth is a god, the sun is a god, the storms are gods. So we are going to continue to see how the story tells us the gods of Egypt are weaker than the God of Israel. So Moses, his mother does not want him to be murdered by the soldiers, because that's what Pharaoh does. He sends soldiers in to kill babies because the midwives wouldn't do it. Moses' mother takes him, puts him in a basket, and puts him in the Nile River. And the Nile River, if any of you have ever watched a nature documentary, is teeming with crocodiles, like the big ones that are bigger than us, and teeming with crocodiles, teeming with boats, teeming with hippos. Hippos are scary, adorable but scary. And she takes her baby, this creature that is helpless, puts him in a basket in the river, and he sails right into Pharaoh's own house. This is the beginning of us being told the God of Israel is stronger than the gods of Egypt, because the Nile is a god. It's the god Happy, and God overpowers the Egyptian god. Moses goes safely right into Pharaoh's house, where Pharaoh's daughter finds him and raises up this baby alongside her own son, Ramesses. So Moses grows up in the palace, in the Egyptian palace. I think they're called palaces. Anyway, grows up side by side with the boy who's going to be Pharaoh next. And when they are adults, Moses is out and he sees an Egyptian beating an Israelite slave, and he becomes enraged and he kills the Egyptian. After he kills the Egyptian, he runs away because he knows he's going to be punished for killing. He goes into the desert. He essentially starts over. He starts a new life. He meets a tribe. He gets married. He's working as a shepherd. And then God comes to him in a burning bush, and he tells Moses, you have to go back and free the slaves. And there are so many amazing things that happen in this. The burning bush episode itself is so rich, but we're going to skip over that right now because there's other stuff. So God tells him, you're going back and you have to free the slaves. So Moses does this. He listens to God and he goes back. And at this point, his brother, half-brother, stepbrother, who he grew up in the palace with, is Pharaoh. He goes to his brother and he says, you have to free the slaves. Pharaoh's like, no, I'm not going to free the slaves. Like, very cute of you to come back, but absolutely not. So plagues begin to happen, brought on by God, as Moses is basically, he's the facade that we get to see all these things through. So Moses says, free the slaves. Pharaoh says no. And the very first plague is turning the Nile River into blood. Now, some people say that because this does happen, it's one of the natural phenomenons where the silt that is red in the river, it will actually come up and it makes the water red like blood. So there are different things that happen. And some people have said all of these are naturally occurring events, and the fact that Moses was able to stand before those and at the start of them, that's what's miraculous. Other people look at this as allegorical, saying that the plagues themselves did not actually happen, but the story itself is telling us that the Egyptian gods are weaker than Israel. So you are actually free to take this in any way, and you can take it miraculously that God sent these plagues specifically and that they weren't naturally occurring. So this is kind of one of those things where it's open to interpretation. I like to take it allegorically, where this story is showing us that the God of Israel has all of the power in these situations. So Moses stands up and the first plague comes. The Nile River turns to blood. This challenges again the Nile god Hapi. Pharaoh says, no, I will not free the slaves. The next plague that comes along is a plague of frogs. And this is targeting Heket. She is the goddess of fertility, and she has a frog head. So again, we're being told Egyptian gods are not as strong as the God of Israel. Next is Jeb is challenged, the earth god, because lice rise up out of the earth and plague the Egyptians. Again, Pharaoh says no. So next, Khepri is challenged by the God of Israel and loses because flies plague the people. Next, Hathor is challenged. She's the cow goddess, and she has a cow head because the livestock of the Egyptians were killed. Pharaoh will still not free the slaves. So next, following that, is the people come down with boils all over their skin, and Isis is being challenged. She is the goddess of medicine and health, and she can't protect the Egyptians from what the God of Israel is doing. Again, the following is Nut. He is the sky god. He is challenged because hail rains down on the people, and he can't do anything about it. A storm of locusts follows, and this challenges the god Seth. He cannot save the Egyptians from the Israel god. Then Ra, who is the god of the sun. The sun goes black because Pharaoh still will not free the slaves. Now, something important to note is that every time a pharaoh came into order, they were considered a god as well. The last plague is challenging Ramesses specifically. Moses says, if you do not free the slaves, all of the firstborn children are going to die. Again, this is something that continues about this firstborn child being a sacrifice. Okay? The Israel children, we're going to learn they don't participate in this because of the Passover meal. So in preparation, Ramesses basically says, I'm still not freeing the slaves, kill my child, or he doesn't believe that could happen because he's too full of his own power. He's like, I am a god, this won't happen. So Moses goes to the community and he has a set of rules that he delivers to the people. And he's saying, we have to do all of these things, otherwise the plague will also hit our households. And so the rules that he gives is we have to perform what they call Passover. Everybody is to take an unblemished lamb and kill it and drain the blood from it. Take that blood on a hyssop branch, and please remember the hyssop branch because this is so important. Take the hyssop branch and mark the door frame with blood. So everybody has to do this. Everyone in the house then has to eat the meat of the lamb. Everything must be consumed and everybody has to participate. And then no bones of the lamb are to be broken. All of these things are going to point us to Jesus because these exact same things happened to him when he sacrificed. So tuck it away in your brain and I'm going to come back to it. Now, the Passover meal there are 4 cups that are drank, 4 cups of wine. The first cup is the cup of sanctification, then the cup of deliverance, then the cup of redemption. And then they sing the great Hallel. This is what Jesus was doing at the Last Supper. This is the meal that he was participating in. They sing this song, and then they drink the final cup, the cup of the covenant. So the Israelites are doing this in preparation for this final plague, and you have to remember it, okay? You have to store it in your brain. And the angel of death passes over the Israelites. Pharaoh's son dies, and he releases the slaves. All of these plagues are telling us that the God of Israel is stronger than any of the Egyptian gods, and that he is the true God. So the slaves are then free. They cross the Red Sea, which is parted for them. And then the Egyptians were told that Pharaoh changed his mind. He sent chariots after them. He went after them also, but the water swallowed them up. And that's the end of the story from there. Then the Israelites will wander in the desert for 40 years before they come to the land that is promised to them. And, we'll have to pick up with the story after that. So please tuck away the points of the Passover meal. Keep those. And next we're going to talk about the Davidic covenant, the covenant with David. The covenant with David is going to be another big one because we get the Passover meal from Moses, and then we get the lineage from Abraham and David. And we're going to find out that Jesus had to be a descendant of Abraham. We already talked about that, but he also has to be a descendant of David. Okay, that's coming next. So you guys have a wonderful week, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Bye.